Good morning again, and it's time to hear from the Lord's Word again. Um, Let me put something out there for you guys before we start. Now, last week we talked about the church as a whole, but tabernacle specifically, and we looked at a message from Hebrews about our purpose, God, which is God's purpose for us, and how that came about. But, the challenge, the question was, and it is a challenge, that as a church and as an integral part of the church, me as an individual, when it comes to accomplishing God's purpose, do I play to win or do I play not to lose? There's a big difference between the two. Because to play not to lose is inevitably to lose. And when we come up with all the reasons why we cannot do something, we tend to forget that God can do anything. And He's going to accomplish His purpose. And so what we're going to do here over the next several weeks is we're going to look at God's preparation of His people, His calling of them, and they're His own possession, as Hebrews or as 2 Peter 2:9 says. But we belong to Him, and God's people belong to Him. They're to accomplish His purpose, but we're not to do it in our own strength. If we think about something that we should do, and we add everything up, and we realize we can't do it, that's where God starts. Because if we can do it, then we don't need Him. All we need Him to do is just let us breathe and maintain our health. We don't need Him to do anything like supernatural or amazing or miraculous. We don't need any God stuff. It's just, God, leave us alone. Let us figure how we can do this, and then if we think we can do it, we'll do it. If we think we can't, we won't. Well, God's not in that. And so we're going to see that story today. We're getting, if Jesus tarries is coming, a chance for kind of like a reboot, a fresh start, a new beginning. Now, it's going to, the physical evidence of it will be outside here, and in case you haven't looked at the plans or maybe don't have an understanding, we're going to have a big open area out there, and it'll have I think of it as a bar, a coffee bar in there. One of the most important people at Tabernacle going forward to minister to others. Why do people go sit at a bar when there's nobody there but them and the bartender? They need somebody to listen to them. They need somebody to connect with. And I do believe that some of the most effective ministry in this place, in this time, will take place when there's only a person back there and the person behind the bar to minister God's grace. If you'd like to be one of those people, then we're looking for some people that just want to love on somebody, that want to be there when that one person shows up. It's not that you don't want to be there for everybody, to serve and smile and welcome and make them feel at home. But when that person that's scared to come in here will sit out there and talk, that's an earth-changing, life-changing, eternal thing that'll happen. And you see, that's a part of the reason for this. We're going to have some few needs for people to be, you could say greeters, or you could say hostesses, or hosts, or just whatever. But guys, and I want to hear this, because sometimes I spend maybe too much time inside my own head and not enough time listening. So I want to ask this question. Can you think of any reason that a guest at a really nice restaurant, that guest should be treated better than God's guests when they come in His house? Is there any reason that they should be treated better, that they should be valued more? And I can't, perhaps you can, but I cannot think of a reason why that should be so. Because these people are coming to God's house. And, you kind of understand a welcome when you go to somebody's house. And if they greet you at the door, if they offer you the best seat in the house, if they are like, can we get you anything, would you like, anything to drink, can I take your coat, I mean, just whatever, we make them feel special when they come in our house. The way not to make them feel special is to sit back in your recliner and say, just come on in, sit anywhere you like, I'm watching the ball game. Which pictures more adequately what people find when they walk in most churches? I'm in my seat, I'm doing my thing, don't bother me. Or, man, I'm so glad to see you. Can I take your coat? Could I get you a cup of coffee? Bottle of water? Anything. And I realize fully that not everybody has the gift of help me out. I'm counting on Joy to speak up and of hospitality that this requires. But a lot of people don't really have a gift of hospitality, but they sure know how to welcome people into their home and treat people. So going forward, just over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at the God side of this, but also our side of it. And the primary text that we're going to be using, the primary story, the biblical example, is when God brought the people of Israel to the promised land, and then when he brought them back around and finally went into the promised land. Because the first time they went, they didn't get in. And that wasn't because God wasn't ready. It was because they weren't ready. Now, our primary text is going to be Numbers 13. And I would love for you guys to find that, and Numbers 14. This is just going to kind of get us started as we hear this story today. And it gets fairly long, and I'm not going to read the whole story in the interest of time, but let me just get us started this morning. We're going to look at a message today, and there's some characters. There's some real characters in this story. There's some giants, there's some grasshoppers, and there's some grumblers. And the sad thing is that for God's people, chosen for his purpose, God had them a place. He had them a purpose. He had made them his people. And he was prepared. He was ready. They were not. The giants, the grasshoppers, and the grumblers forgot the battle is the Lord's. And he had already given it to them. So, we're going to pick up here. And I want you to look for you should. Have you got some notes in your program today? Okay, got them? All right, you've got a main point there, and let me just go ahead and give it to you because we need to be looking for this as we go. And this applies in a lot of ways. When God says go, he means now. When he says come, he means now. God does not wait until we get ready to do what he wants. He's going to do what he wants, ready or not, depending on how we are. His timing is perfect. His timing is not dependent upon our readiness. And when God says go, you go. And you're like, well, I don't see how we're going to do it. It doesn't matter. God knows what's going to happen. He knows the end from the beginning. He's going to accomplish his purpose. His word that goes out of his mouth, he says, will not return to him void. So when he says go, it's now. When he says come, it's now. It's like for so many people that know God's got something for them, and they're like, I'm just not quite ready for that. If he's calling, he's ready, he'll get you through it. Because he's brought you to it, he'll get you through it. And so he got the people, let me just kind of put this in context. He got the people out of Israel. They'd been slaves for 400 years. They were not soldiers. They were brick makers. They were farmers. They were builders. They were house servants. They were slaves. And so they weren't ready to take on armies, except for the fact that God was giving them these things. The battle is not. And God told Jehoshaphat, King Jehoshaphat of Judah, when he's looking at getting overrun and overwhelmed, he in effect so many words, he says, don't worry about them. You worry about me, because this is my battle. You do what I tell you, I'll give you the victory. So, that being said, he's brought them out of Egypt. Most of us would know at least some parts of the story about all the miraculous ways that happened. and he's brought them. There's some debate over just how long it took them to get from Egypt to the border of this promised land, but it's not very long. If you just walked it, a couple of weeks. The most likely thing is it was a couple of years for them to get there, because he prepared them spiritually going in. But anyway, he brings them up. Moses leads them up. In chapter 13, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan. That's the promised land, which I am giving. You see, and they miss that. I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. That's where they were, right on the border of Canaan. All of them were leaders of the Israelites, and he names them off, 12 of them, one from each tribe. And on down in verse 16, it says, these are the names of the men Moses sent to explore the land. And the one that's called Hosea in this list, Moses gave him a different name, which is Joshua, and which means the Lord saves. So when Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How's the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob toward Lebo Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan was in Egypt. Just puts it in a historical context. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. Now, they started from the south. They went all the way to the north, and they worked their way back. It took them 40 days. It was a round-trip journey of almost 500 miles. It's about 250 miles from south to north of this land. So it took them a while. And they were thorough. Moses told them to be thorough. You know, for one thing, if you're in an agrarian society, I mean, you got to eat. Well, what kind of soil do you have? You know, is it good or bad? I find it remarkable that my wife, my lovely bride, loves grapes, which I do too, but not like she does. And she often brings home a cluster of grapes from the grocery store, and they don't last long. Well, you can hold them up like this. You know, maybe they weigh a pound. Maybe a big cluster will weigh 2 or 3 pounds. But this one, they had to, you know, put it like a deer or a dead hog or something on a pole between the 2 of them. It was, you know, the land wasn't just good. It was fantastic. And so they went and they got their information. So then they come back. And in verse 26, it picks up again. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. Here's all the good. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Anakites were people of tremendous stature. Some would say giants. Goliath was, pretty much a descendant of this same line. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. So they're telling why they can't go. They're recounting these are these problems. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses. Caleb's one of the spies that went in. I'll just mention to you, I know that Caleb was in his early 40s at this time. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of it, for we can certainly do it." And he's not saying we can do it in our own strength. Caleb believes God. And in order for us to play to win, in order for us to become and be the people that God wants us to be, it is essential. You cannot take away that we have to believe God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. So faith must be put into action in order for God to be pleased, in order for God to do through us and in us what he wants to do. And so Caleb says, we can do it. It's just like David looked at Goliath and said, "Son, your goose is cooked and you just don't even know it." David said, "You come to me with sword and shield and spear, but I come against you with God on my side. And today, you're going to die right here, and God's going to rout these people." It was a difference between a kid looking and saying, "Man, I need to run," and one looking and saying, "I'm going to see how God's going to kill this giant today, and I'm going to be a part of it." But the men, Caleb says go. But the men who had gone up with, and Caleb's like, "Go now. God's already given them to us. He's given us this land. We just need to go take it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored not feeds those living in it, sustains those living in it. The land we have explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there were of great size." Well, no, they weren't. They've gone to lying. They've gone from pursuing God's purpose to practicing politics. And this is how you should be aware. This is how politics works. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So we got giants and we got grasshoppers. Let's go to our notes for just a minute and just kind of put this in perspective. We'll find out that they didn't go. The grumblers won out. The people who saw themselves as grasshoppers instead of God's people won the day politically. So the main point is, when God says go, he means now. I've given it to you, go take it. Well, we don't calculate that we can do it. Well, of course you don't. If we could do it, then there's no glory to God in it. There's glory to us. And it makes us look good when we're supposed to show the world that God is good. Guys, there's this enormous stumbling block that when we, God's people, God's chosen people, we are a chosen people, Peter wrote, a royal priesthood. God picked us out, brought us to himself, and he's got a purpose for us, and that's to live out our faith. And when we say we can't do it, we are 100% right. We can't do it. But God's already done it. It's just like, in bringing people to church and looking for opportunities to share what Christ means to us, to share our testimony, to share the gospel. We can't save anybody. We can't argue them into giving their lives to Jesus or persuade them into giving their lives to Jesus. Only God can save them. But there's names. God has a book. In that book are hundreds of millions, at minimum, hundreds of millions of names of people who are going to be in heaven. Not all of them have come to Jesus yet. Not all of them have heard the gospel yet. There's still people coming to Christ more so than ever at any time in history. At this time, most of them are coming in foreign lands and, in other places where they haven't been beat to death with the gospel, as it were, over the course of time. But God's not through saving people from right here. Our families, our friends, our community, our culture, those names are written down. He's already promised. He's already, as it were, given these giants that there's no way they're coming to Jesus. He delights in bringing them to himself. But somebody's got to be out there as his ambassador, as his representatives, as his warriors. The battle's the Lord's, and he will be victorious. But our place is to believe God, and when he says go, to go. Jesus gave the go word before he went to heaven. Go ye therefore and make disciples of all nations. That go is still in place. He's never rescinded that marching order for his people. So when he says go, he means now. It's just some points on this. Timing is critical. Timing is critical. On September the 17th, 1944, the largest airborne invasion in all of history took place in Holland, in the Netherlands. They sent 3 airborne divisions to take some river crossings, some bridges, so that the Allies would be able to get into Germany and hopefully put a short end to the war. The plan was developed by General Montgomery, the commander of British forces, and was participated in by the British, by the Americans, the Canadians, and some Polish army people. They were 4 days late. You see, when they started planning that, the Germans were in full retreat. They were headed back to Germany as hard as they could go, whether they were riding bicycles or vehicles or walking, and a bunch of them were even taking off their uniforms and stealing people's clothes so that they wouldn't look like German soldiers. They were so scared. But during the course of that time, some of Germany's preeminent military leaders showed up. And because Montgomery delayed cutting off Germany's 15th Army, which was on like a peninsula way up, they all got out. A whole entire army, trained army, well-led army. And when, this enormous flotilla of planes and gliders, like 5,000, aircraft, began to land, the Germans were waiting on it. And as it went on and on, the Germans grew thicker. They were reinforced. They were, and they fought. And what could have been, if they had just gone on in time, an enormous victory and a shortening to the war, because they delayed 4 days, and admittedly, part of it was because of weather. But because they delayed 4 days, the Allied forces suffered one of their greatest defeats of the entire war. And it was a slaughter on the wrong side. Timing's critical. When God is ready, it's time to go. Doesn't matter if I'm ready or not. It's like that old children's game, hide and seek. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ready or not, here I come. Well, I'm not hidden yet. Well, I counted to 10. There I come. And when God is ready, the giants will fall. When God is ready, his will happen. But when he says go, he means now. When he says come, to those he's calling to step out from where they've been, their comfort zone, or whatever it may be, their lostness, when he says come to Jesus, it's time to be saved, he means now. When he says come to me and I will make you fishers of men, he means now. When he says go, he means his timing is perfect. God does not work on my calendar, on my schedule. His timing is never bad. It is always perfect. And if he's saying go now, then go now. If he's saying come now, then come now. If he says wait, then wait. But be sure it's what he's saying. Timing is critical. There was an old song years ago about Moses, and I can't even begin to remember it, but there's a story told in it about Moses bringing in all the animals. And it began to rain, and Moses has called for them to come in, and the unicorns are too busy playing. They won't come. And the door was shut. And the story goes, and that's why you never seen any unicorns no more. Timing's critical. Timing is critical. And God's promise is perfected when we perform our part. The battle is the Lord's, but I'm the guy that carries the sword, or this sword in this case. We have to perform our part. The Hebrews, the Israelites, wouldn't go, as we'll see as we continue the study. They wouldn't go, and so they didn't get. It's like, why don't we have? It's because we don't put feet to our faith. We understand. Some other points that are in your notes. Number one, the giants never defeated the Israelites. Giants never killed a single one of them, as far as I know. The grumblers defeated the Israelites. You see how that worked? Well, let's take a look. That night, chapter 14. All the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. They didn't believe God. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because, now you remember they said the land we saw devours the people. Look what they said. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. And then, this next part we will look at a little later. But giants never killed a single Israelite, as far as we know. The grumblers killed 2 whole generations. And the grumblers, the people that saw themselves as grasshoppers were far more deadly than the giants ever were. If I only look at what I can do, if we only look at what we as a church can do, then we're not looking at what God does all the time. You understand? Please tell me, and then again I'm asking, when has God ever failed in anything? When has he ever failed in anything? Are giants a problem for God? Is sickness a problem for God? Is death a problem for God? He's never failed in anything, guys. And when he says go, he means now, because he's ready. God does not fail. In this case, grasshoppers were deadly. And men and women, people who see themselves only as grasshoppers, only as being able to do what we can do. They cause others to fall. You can't do that. We can't do that. Those people are too big. Those cities are too strong. You can't do that. And all these people bought in, except for Caleb and Joshua, and said, we don't have to do that. God's already done that. Let's go. This is the difference. The church is Christ's prized possession. The people that make it up are a chosen people, a people purchased with blood. And God has plans for us. And we need to get past this, Lord, just help me hang on, and get the Lord, help me go forth. And he says, go forth, and you say, I'm not ready. God says, that doesn't matter. I'm ready. I'm ready. And with all my heart, I tell you, God is ready to turn this church, this community, upside down. There's got to be some people who are willing to go. These folks, they just wanted to go live in the comfort of their own tents. They didn't want to lose what they had. That's playing not to lose. Instead of playing to win, as Caleb and Joshua said, we can do it. God doesn't play not to lose. But for his reasons, whatever he does, he says, all right, I'll let you have your way for a while, but you'll die in it. People that see themselves as grasshoppers and see the challenges that face the church and that face us as giants, they cause others to fall. They fail to see, listen to me carefully, that with God inside, Christ in me, and on my side, it's the giants that need to tremble, because they will surely fall if I am found faithful to believe God and go when he says go. The Israelites, and here's like the crux of the matter, the heart of the problem, and I have to give some credit in this case to Dr. David Jeremiah, who kind of gave me one of these words as I was listening to him the other day. The Israelites had more faith in their calculations than they did in God's faithfulness. You see, I can calculate all kinds of reasons why I shouldn't do something. I could easily calculate why, we need to keep that $500,000 in the bank. We don't need to. That's our safety net. That's what gets us into the future. No, it's not. God is our safety net. God is our future. If we calculate that we can do it without God, then we miss God doing anything. And we become like a club, like some organization. Well, what's our budget for this year? Well, we calculate that we will receive, $10. And so we'll do like that's all we have. At least got out of it. Again, the question, do we play to win? That is, have faith in God and act and work and live on that faith, or do we play not to lose? And I'm just shooting as straight with y'all as I can, as things have come up through the years here in my tenure here, and I know it went on long before I ever got here, and I know that it's not specific to Tabernacle. I am repeatedly and have been repeatedly told, when it's evident that we should do something, that by my calculations we can't do that. Because if we do that, the grumblers will grumble like giants, and we'll lose what we have. Is that being faithful? Is that what you would have me to do, or how you would have me to lead? Caleb and Joshua said, this is what God has told us. This is what he wants. The other people said, we calculate that we can't do that. They gave all the reasons why not. Caleb and Joshua gave one reason why. Because God said, go now. And God is faithful. Has God ever failed at anything? And is God satisfied just to keep us from losing what we have? Or does he want us to gain what he wants to give us? The future of this church depends on this. I'm going to go over a couple of more things here, but I want to remind you of something that's coming. The people didn't go. And God says, okay. And Moses led them to their death. 40 years. All of these people who grumbled and wouldn't go, every last one of them died. 40 years later, God brought them back. And they went. But the ones that had the faith weren't the old grumblers. They were the new people whom God has raised up. You see, God still was going to have his people live in that land. And the giants fell, and the walls came tumbling down. And they're there today, many of them. I use this as an illustration, as an analogy of the church today. I don't know, I'd like to go back and maybe count sometime. And I have been deeply saddened by the loss of every person that we've buried, in my nearly 12 years here now. Grieved deeply at the loss of Mr. Rooney Key, this last week. I have his funeral today. All those people, 600,000 men that Moses led out of Egypt, he buried every single one of them but 2. Why? Because they didn't believe God. And they had more faith in their calculations than they had in God's faithfulness. God is no less able today than he has ever been. The fields are whiter unto harvest than they have ever been. The hordes of humanity are hungrier for hope and help and Christ than they have ever been, whether they know it or not. And God is able, and he has said, go. Show them how I love you. Show them the way to have a relationship with me and how to relate to one another. Don't live as the world lives. Live as I showed you to live. Don't live by calculations, because the righteous live by faith. A couple of things that we can do. Number 1 is to believe God. And then number 2, hallelujah. Number 2 is to begin again. You see, God's mercies are new every day. Those of us who have said no, or later, or I'm not ready, all these years, God's ready right now. And my prayer is that he's going to raise up the few. I would pray that he would raise up the many, but the many are grasshoppers, and they see themselves as grasshoppers even though they're not. And the many are grumblers, and that gets in the way of those that would help fell the giants. But I'm praying that he will raise up some that may not see how and may not necessarily see why, but know that God is saying go. And that they'll be the ones out there in the golf cart, welcoming people to God's house on Sunday morning with much more enthusiasm and purpose than the people, at Charlie's 21 in downtown Manhattan welcome the guests there that are just coming to eat and drink. And that God will so fill these people that when people will come in, they'll say, those people are giant killers. They make their faith look real. They actually live what they believe. When I go there, I feel like I'm special. And when I go there, I see God at work because I see how he's working. Those people believe God, and they live like they believe it. They live by faith. And you can start that again today. We need to believe God. He's never lied. He's never failed. We need to believe him. When Jesus said, God here with us, to Peter, you're Peter, a rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. He didn't say the giants won't. He said the very heart and soul of the giants, the gates of hell itself, will not prevail against it. The church is not going to be defeated. We may be, as Paul said, beaten down. We may be, troubled. We may be wounded. We may be hurt. But we're going to get back up and we're going to go again. You can begin again. Are you ready? Because God is. Every journey, every great journey, begins with a single, simple, but maybe it's a giant step. On July the 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon for the very first time. He said it's one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. The first step that we must make in order to begin to serve God in a new and a greater and a faithful way, the first step that we must take is to make up our mind to take the first step. And so that's where we are, and that's where we'll be working toward in these next few weeks. Well, I don't think I'll make a very good name it, and I get kind of shaky when I want to take that first step because it's a giant step for me. I've never done that before. Look, 7 final words of a dying organization, business, or churches. We've never done it that way before. You're going to die if that's your mindset. And so for us, going forward, do we play to win or do we play not to lose? Do we want to die in the desert and just be comfortable and just get buried? Or do we want to see the giants fall? Well, that first step is to stop talking and calculating and figuring and start walking. God says go, we go. We may not see how, we go. We may not know what the outcome's going to be, we go. Because God says go. And he's never failed. And he's never lied. We stop talking, we start walking. The way that we know to go is first we find Jesus, and many of us may have strayed apart. Church might have just come about what we do at church instead of walking in the footsteps of Jesus, who went out of his way to show people the love of God. It was his mission in life. We find Jesus, we follow Jesus, and then, folks, we watch out for fallen giants. This is not some beatdown or anything else. It's a picture of the difference of when we believe and limit ourselves to what we can do, and we believe our calculations, or we believe God, and then we see what he can do. Which will it be? I know which it is for me. Each of us has to make up our own mind. Something happened, and we'll see it a little bit later. 40 years after these events that we read about today, Israel came back up to the Jordan River, to the border of that promised land. And it was whole brand new set of people. Except there was Moses. Moses didn't make it in. He died on the wrong side of the river. But he shepherded those people. God bless him. He shepherded those faithless people for 40 years. Like I said, he buried 600,000 men, minus 2. But the day came when the new people, the young people, and if you hear something here that says don't hold these young people back, do not hold our young people back that love God. They may not have it all right, and they may make you uncomfortable. So be it. If they're following God, let them go. And at least be their cheerleaders and their prayer warriors. But a day came when that new generation massed behind 2 old men. And their names were Caleb and Joshua. And they were in their 80s, but they said they were undiminished and they were keen to fight. They were keen to follow their faith and God's orders, and they wanted to see some giants fall. And when those 2 old men with sword in hand came up out of that Jordan riverbed and set foot on the promised land, figuratively, if not literally, that whole land and every giant in it began to tremble. And well, they should. Because the first one across the river wasn't Caleb, wasn't Joshua, it was God himself. And when we're faithful, the giants will fall. Let's pray. Lord, help us look at what you want and not our own limitations. Help us not operate by our calculations, but live and breathe and minister by faith. The giants that, Lord, I know you want to see fall in this day are giants named apathy, and giants named timing, and giants named finances, and giants named culture, and giants named drugs, and giants named infidelity. And there's all these giants, politics, education. Lord, just help me. Help us be found faithful. And may you be glorified in all that we say and do. In Christ's name.